Frankie Brown saves a sleepover. But the moment we crashed through Charlie's bedroom door, we skidded to a stop at the site in front of us. I knew something freaky was happening because the whole room was glowing green, the very same eerie glow as the lightning in the storm, the water in the pool and the light bulbs during the maths test, but this time it was coming from the hamster cage. Something weird is happening to Mr. Fluffles. I've not read about this in any of my hamster books, screamed Katie, looking at the hamster who was glowing a luminous green. I took a step closer to the cage and stared at something I will never be able to unsee. Gangster, aka Mr. Fluffles, wasn't just glowing, he was growing. His fluffy body was stretching and expanding in the light of the midnight moon. His spiky fluff was poking through the bars of the cage, making the metal bend and creak. He's going to break out, I cried, but it was too late. The first bars went bing and twang across the room as Mr. Fluffles burst out of his cage. He stood fully upright on his back legs and stretched to the sky, glowing a vibrant pukey green like some sort of furry hamster Hulk monster. Now that's a cool pet, Charlie cheered. But at the sound of Charlie's voice, the humongous human-sized hamster turned its glowing green eyes on us. Now I realise I'm the bravest person you know, but even I was scared when Mr. Fluffles leapt across the room. I swear, for a second I thought he was going to eat me, or at least store me in one of his cheek pouches. But he went straight past me and stuffed his fluffy, oversized nose in a half-eaten bag of popcorn from the fairground. He must be hungry, Charlie realised. Quick, hand over your snacks. The other boys and I fished around in our pockets, and the girls dug into their sleeping bags to reveal their sleepover snacks too. We handed them all to Charlie to give Mr. Fluffles. I was gutted that I'd run upstairs with my choco glazed donut and now had to hand it over to Charlie to feed his hamster. Don't do it, Charlie, Jamila shrieked. He'll eat you alive. I've got to. If he doesn't eat this, he might eat us, Charlie said. Of course, I would have stepped up and fed the creature too, but I have a baby brother at home to be the role model to. If something happened to me, I couldn't bear to think about what Max might end up like. So I did the brave thing and let Charlie feed the ravenous 2-metre-high rodent alone. He's only eating popcorn and he's eaten it all, Charlie hissed in a nervous, high-pitched whisper. The fluffy monster then started leaping around the room, scratching at the windows. He needs exercise, Katie the hamster expert spluttered. The popcorn's giving him lots of energy and he'll have to burn it off. That's why hamsters have wheels in their cages. That's great, Katie, but how do you plan on exercising a ginormous hamster? Snapped a trembling Ronnie from behind the bed. I mean, it's not like there's a giant wheel for him to run on. That's when he said that, an idea popped into my head as though an invisible wizard had whispered it in my ear. That's it, I cried. What is it? Charlie asked. A giant wheel, I said, pointing out of the bedroom window, where, over the rooftops in the distance, we could see the twinkling lights of the fairground, still lit up against the night sky. Towering above it all was the Ferris wheel. A giant wheel, I whooped. Plus, that place had loads of popcorn that he can eat. It'll be empty now, too, so no one will see Mr. Fluffles. Without hesitation, Charlie went into full Indiana Jones mode and whipped the belt out of a dressing gown hanging on his bedroom door. He lassoed it round Mr. Fluffles and leapt onto the giant hamster's back. I guess reading all those books on dangerous animals paid off. To the fairground, he commanded, and the mutant rodent seemed to understand his words. It was as though Charlie had some sort of special ability to communicate with his pet. They charged out of the bedroom, down the stairs, and burst through the front door. We all armed ourselves with torches and followed them out into the night, hopped on anything with wheels that was lying around Charlie's garden, and chased after them. It turns out it's not that hard to follow a giant rodent being ridden by a child. As they were setting off nearly every car alarm as they tore through the streets of Freaky. We rode our bikes past car after car with smashed mirrors, broken headlights, shattered windows. I told you Charlie should have called him gangster. I called to the others as we looked at the trail of destruction. We arrived at the deserted fairground to find Charlie and Mr. Fluffles at the enormous Ferris wheel. The giant hamster leapt straight to the top and began sprinting as fast as he could, with his tongue flapping happily out of his mouth. I knew this would work, cheered Charlie, watching his monstrous new pet beaming with pride. He ran faster and faster, just like hamsters do, on their little wheels in their cages. Except this one was massive. Suddenly, sparks started fizzing from a enormous hamster wheel, and not just any sparks, green sparks. Charlie, I think something's happening, I said. Look, those sparks aren't coming from the wheel. They're coming from Mr. Fluffles. The sparks didn't slow him down, though. He got faster and faster and faster until, zap, a cloud of green smoke puffed into the air where Mr. Fluffles had been running, and when it cleared, the huge hamster had vanished. He's gone, we all gasped as Charlie leapt towards the giant wheel. He crouched down, his head hanging low, looking sad. What's wrong? Katie asked. Where's Mr. Fluffles? Jamila choked. Is he... I couldn't finish the question. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a tiny little eek. Oh, you're alive! You're alive! Charlie cheered. He scooped up the now perfectly unharmed hamster-sized Mr. Fluffles and gave him a huge fluffy cuddle. I thought I'd lost you for a second. We all cheered. He was alive, and the risk of being munched by a ginormous hamster had gone. Then we headed back to Charlie's house as the sun was starting to rise, and by the time we got there, it was morning. As the front door closed behind us, Mr. and Mrs. Campbell were coming down the stairs. Blimey, you're awake early. Have you been outside? Mr. Campbell asked. We looked nervously at each other. I mean, we could hardly say yes. We went back to the fairground to let the mutant hamster you bought your son have a run on the Ferris wheel so he wouldn't eat us. Charlie said, yeah, Katie said hamsters like exercise, so we let Mr. Fluffles have a run around on the grass in the front garden. Mr. and Mrs. Campbell looked at each other. Charlie, that's very responsible, Mr. Campbell beamed. If you keep on looking after Mr. Fluffles like this, perhaps you could have one of those more wild and exotic pets for your next birthday. Charlie held up Mr. Fluffles and looked into his deep green eyes. You know what, Dad? I've changed my mind. I think maybe this little hamster is wild enough for me. Charlie grinned, and we all burst out laughing. Needless to say, it was the best sleepover ever. Wish you could have been there, Danny. Frankie. P.S. I've just remembered. When we were at the fairground, I'm 89.9% sure that I spotted that shadow again. The one I saw move in the front garden. Can shadows follow you? Weird.